The first time he postponed our honeymoon, I nodded calmly and let him go. The words are etched into the fabric of my being, a permanent scar on what was supposed to be the most pristine day of my life. We weren't at the altar, not literally. We were at the airport, bathed in the sterile, optimistic light of the international terminal. The scent of overpriced coffee and jet fuel hung in the air, a perfume of new beginnings. My hand was tucked securely in the crook of Alexander's arm, my new wedding band, a sleek platinum band he'd designed himself, feeling both foreign and like it had always belonged there. We were Alexander and Alara. Power couple. Childhood sweethearts who had defied the odds. He was the brilliant, driven CEO of his own tech startup, and I was the artist who had grounded him, the calm to his storm. Our wedding 3 days prior had been a masterpiece of understated elegance, a reflection of us. Or so I'd thought. I was scrolling through pictures on my phone, a secret smile playing on my lips. There was one of us dancing, his forehead resting against mine, his eyes closed as if committing the moment to memory. I was about to show him when his phone vibrated, not the standard ringtone, but the specific piercing trill he reserved for one person. Lily. His best friend since college. The girl who was always just there, a constant, wistful shadow in the periphery of our relationship. She was fragile, prone to mysterious ailments and emotional crises that only Alexander seemed capable of soothing. I'd tried in the beginning to befriend her. But there was always a wall, a subtle competition I never signed up for. Her smiles never reached her eyes when they looked at me. Alexander's posture changed instantly. The relaxed, honeymoon-bound husband vanished, replaced by the hyper-focused problem solver. "It's Lily's mom," he said, his voice tight. "Something's wrong." He answered, his back turning to me slightly. I caught snippets. "An accident." "Where?" "How bad?" "I'm on my way." He ended the call and turned to me. The airport noise seemed to fade into a dull roar, the world narrowing to the grim set of his jaw and the apology already blooming in his eyes. "Alara," he began, his hands coming up to cradle my elbows. "There's been an incident. Lily was in a car accident. She's in the hospital. It's serious. She's asking for me." The ground beneath my feet, solid just moments before, felt suddenly unstable. "How serious?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "They don't know yet. Possible internal bleeding. She's alone, Lara. Her mom is a mess. She has no one else." His thumb stroked my arm, a placating gesture. "We need to postpone the honeymoon. She needs me now." And there was the choice, presented not as a choice at all but as a moral imperative. She needs me now. The unspoken corollary hung between us, heavy and accusatory. You, on the other hand, can wait. You are strong. You are understanding. You are my wife. I looked at him, at the man who had vowed to put me first just 72 hours ago. I saw the genuine distress in his face, the tug-of-war between his duty to her and his promise to me. But I also saw the decision had already been made. Arguing would make me the villain, the selfish new wife who lacked compassion. So I did what I always did. I was the calm. I was the rock. I nodded calmly. "Okay." Relief flooded his features. He pulled me into a crushing hug. "Thank you, my love. I'll make this up to you. I promise. I'll get us on the next flight out as soon as she's stable." He kissed me, a hurried, distracted press of lips, already mentally in a hospital room miles away. He grabbed his carry-on, the one with his suits and shaving kit, and left his larger suitcase, the one filled with the swim trunks and beach novels I'd packed for him. A symbolic abandonment. I stood alone amidst the bustling crowd, a statue of a bride in a travel-friendly linen dress. I watched his retreating back until he disappeared into the throng, heading for the exit for a taxi for her. The first crack appeared then, not in my heart but in the foundation of my understanding. For years I had accepted the Lily dynamic. The late-night calls. The cancelled dinners. The way her name could change the atmosphere in a room. I had told myself it was a testament to Alexander's loyalty, his capacity for deep friendship. But this was different. This was our honeymoon. The sacred, symbolic start of our marriage. A flight announcement for Paris echoed through the terminal, the destination of our now-defunct romantic getaway. I looked down at my boarding pass, my name next to his. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood. Slowly, deliberately I walked to the check-in counter. The agent, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Chloe, gave me a sympathetic smile. "Checking in, ma'am? Just the one luggage." I looked at Alexander's abandoned suitcase, then back at her. A strange, cold clarity was washing over me, numbing the initial sting of hurt. "Yes," I said, my voice still eerily calm. "Just me." I checked my bag. I went through security. I walked to the gate. And I boarded the flight to Santorini alone. As the plane lifted off, the city that contained my husband and his distressed damsel shrinking below, I didn't cry. I stared out the window at the boundless blue sky and I made a decision. Alexander thought we were postponing our honeymoon. But as the wheels retracted and the plane climbed above the clouds, I felt something else retract within me. My unconditional acceptance. He had chosen to be her hero. Fine. But I was no longer going to be the patient wife waiting in the wings. The honeymoon was not postponed. It was being repurposed. This flight, this solo journey was no longer about love. It was the beginning of my revenge. A quiet, calculated revenge that would not be born of screaming matches, but of serene, irrevocable action. He had left me at the airport. And in doing so he had set me free. Santorini was a punch to the senses, a brutal kind of beauty that mocked my inner turmoil. The whitewashed buildings of Oahu clung to the cliffs like sea foam, the domes of the churches a brilliant, almost aggressive blue against the endless cerulean of the sky and sea. The air was thick with the scent of salt, jasmine and roasting meat. It was a paradise and I felt like an imposter walking through a dream that belonged to someone else. The villa Alexander had booked was obscene in its perfection. A private infinity pool spilled seemingly into the caldera, with a breathtaking view of the famous sunset. There was a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon chilling in a silver bucket, a note attached in his elegant script, "To the first night of forever." Forever had lasted approximately 3 days. I left the champagne untouched. Instead, I poured myself a glass of local white wine from the minibar, its crisp, acidic taste a welcome shock. I stood on the terrace, the warm Aegean wind whipping my hair, and looked out at the devastating beauty. I should have been heartbroken. I was. But beneath the heartbreak something new was stirring, a cold, sharp anger. My phone buzzed incessantly. "Alexander. Landed safely. At the hospital now. It's worse than they thought. Ruptured spleen. She's in surgery. I'll call when I can. I love you." "She's out of surgery. Critical but stable. The doctors are hopeful. She's been asking for me. I have to stay. Thinking of you. Are you at your mom's? This place is depressing. I miss you." I didn't reply. Let him wonder. Let him picture me curled up on my mother's sofa, eating ice cream and watching rom-coms. The reality was far more dangerous to the narrative he'd constructed. On the second day I forced myself out of the villa. I walked through the narrow, winding streets, a ghost among laughing couples and honeymooners hand in hand. Their happiness was a physical weight against my chest. I found a small, secluded cafe overlooking the sea and ordered a strong Greek coffee. And that's when the plan, fully formed and terrifying, crystallized in my mind. It wasn't enough to just be here without him. That was a reaction. I needed an action. A definitive, irreversible action that would show him and more importantly show myself that I was reclaiming my narrative. Alexander's greatest love after me, and perhaps I was now forced to consider before me, was his company Aura Tech. It was his brainchild, his legacy. He was the visionary, the face, the driving force. And I was the silent partner. Not on paper but in practice. For years I had been his sounding board, his strategist. I had soothed investor egos he'd bruised, deciphered the subtext in contracts he was too impatient to read, and brainstormed marketing campaigns that had catapulted Aura into the spotlight. My artist's eye for detail and human psychology complemented his grand-scale thinking. He had the ideas, I made them palatable, profitable. And I had done it all from the shadows, happy to see him shine. But that meant I knew things. I knew about the offshore accounts he used for certain investments, the ones he thought were clever but were, in reality, a house of cards if the wrong person looked too closely. I knew about the private key to his digital wallet where he kept a substantial, untraceable portion of his crypto assets. I knew the passwords to everything not because I snooped, but because he was notoriously forgetful and relied on me to be his living, breathing password manager. "Your mind is a steel trap, my love," he'd say, kissing my temple. Mine is a sieve. He trusted me implicitly. It was his greatest mistake. The first step was financial. In the privacy of the villa, with the sunset painting the sky in hues of fire and rose, I opened my laptop. I used his credentials to access the corporate accounts. I didn't drain them. That would be crude, traceable, and illegal. Instead, I initiated a series of complex but entirely legitimate transfers. I moved funds from the main operating account into a high-yield short-term bond portfolio I'd been advising him to set up for months. He'd been too busy to sign off on it. Now, with my digital signature, which he'd granted me for emergencies, I executed it. The money wasn't gone. It was just locked away, inaccessible for the immediate cash flow needs he would have in the coming weeks. Next, the crypto. I accessed his wallet. With a few clicks, I transferred a significant amount of Bitcoin and Ethereum to a new, secure, anonymous wallet I created. It was a withdrawal, not a theft, I told myself. Payment for years of unpaid emotional and professional labor. Severance package. My hands were steady. My breath was even. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a corporate restructuring of my life. My phone rang. It was him. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, it buzzed with his message. He sounded tired, strained. Alara, honey, please call me back. I'm worried about you. Lily's awake. Stuff. She's in a lot of pain and she's terrified. I can't leave her side. God, this is a nightmare. I just need to hear your voice. Let me know you're okay. I listened to the message twice. The first time I heard the man I loved, burdened and seeking comfort. The second time, I heard a man explaining why his choice was the only possible one, reinforcing his role as the indispensable pillar in Lily's life. I picked up my phone and typed a single text, my first communication since the airport. I'm safe. Don't worry about me. Focus on what you need to do. It was benign. Understanding. It was the text the old Alara would have sent. It would placate him, keep him in the dark a little while longer. I put the phone down and walked back to the terrace. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a bruised twilight sky. The lights of the villages began to twinkle like fallen stars. I had taken the first irrevocable step. I had siphoned a part of his kingdom, his security, into my control. But it wasn't enough. Money was just a tool. I needed to dismantle the very structure of his life, the life he had built that so easily accommodated my absence. I needed to take everything. And I knew just where to start. With the one thing he loved almost as much as his company, his reputation. But for now, I sat in the gathering darkness, the solo occupant of a honeymoon suite, and I drank my wine. The gilded cage was still around me, but I had just found the key. And I was about to turn the lock. The days in Santorini bled into one another, a sun-drenched montage of strategic planning and solitary reflection. I was no longer the jilted bride. I was a CEO steering the ship of my own future through treacherous, self-created waters. My villa became my war room. The infinity pool was a mirror to the sky, and I would float in it, my body weightless, my mind churning with meticulous, destructive calculations. My next target was Aura Tech's public image. Alexander was a tech darling, featured on magazine covers and invited to speak at glittering conferences. He was lauded for his innovation, his charisma. But the foundation of that reputation was a carefully crafted narrative, one I had helped write. It was time to introduce a new plot twist. I started with The Aura Insider, the company's popular blog. I had been its primary ghostwriter for years, my voice seamlessly mimicking Alexander's confident, slightly brash tone. Now I logged in. The familiar dashboard glowed in the dim light of the villa. I began to draft a post, but this one was different. It was titled, The Unseen Engine, in praise of the quiet partners. In it I wrote, under Alexander's name, a heartfelt, almost confessional tribute to the people behind the scenes. I spoke of a brilliant artistic mind who deciphered the market's soul, a steady hand that guided the ship through storms, a voice of profound reason that he was unworthy of but eternally grateful for. I didn't name myself, but the description was unmistakable to anyone who knew us. I filled it with specific, intimate details of projects I'd salvaged and ideas I'd originated, all framed as Alexander's humble admissions. I set it to auto-publish in 48 hours. Next, I turned to his social media. He was terrible at it, which is why I managed his professional accounts. His password was our wedding date. The irony was a sharp, sweet sting. I scrolled through the feed, polished images of him at keynotes, product launches, the occasional rare photo of us where I looked happy, anchored. He looked possessive, proud. I needed to shatter that curated perfection. I found an old, unpublished draft in his Instagram folder. It was a photo of his desk from months ago, cluttered with schematics and coffee cups. In the corner of the frame, slightly blurred, was a sketch I'd done for a user interface design. My handwriting was visible in the margins. It was a perfect, subtle clue. I crafted a caption, "Late nights and early mornings. This company is built on more than just my vision. So grateful for the silent genius in my life. Hashtag Oratech, hashtag behind the scenes, hashtag partner in crime." I scheduled it to go live the same day as the blog post. This was psychological warfare. It wouldn't crater the company, but it would create confusion. It would make people wonder. Who was he talking about? Was this a co-founder no one knew about? An affair? It would poke a tiny hole in the pristine balloon of his public persona, and the helium of his ego would start to leak out slowly but surely. My phone rang again. This time it was my mother. "Alara, sweetheart, Alexander just called me. He's frantic. He said you're not at my house and you're not answering your phone. Where are you? What's going on?" The sound of her voice, laced with concern, almost broke my resolve. I took a deep breath. "I'm fine, Mom. I needed some space." "Space? Alara, your husband is in a hospital waiting room caring for his critically injured friend and you're taking space? This isn't like you." "That's the point," I thought. "He made his choice, Mom. I'm making mine." There was a long silence on the other end. "Are you safe?" she finally asked, her tone shifting from accusatory to worried. "I'm safer than I've been in a long time," I answered truthfully. After I hung up, I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly subsumed by a renewed sense of purpose. My own mother, the person who knew me best, was conditioned to see Alexander's side. It proved how deeply the narrative of his righteousness was embedded. It was time to escalate. I accessed the shared cloud drive where Alexander kept all his presentation decks and investor pitches. I created a new folder titled ELRA, an acronym he wouldn't understand but I did. Exit, Legacy, Autonomy, Reclamation, Ascension. Inside I began placing documents. Not stolen ones but created ones. I wrote a detailed, faux confidential memo outlining a secret passion project I was supposedly leading. A rival AI interface that was more intuitive, more ethical than Aura's core product. I filled it with technical jargon I'd absorbed over the years and my own visionary ideas he had previously dismissed as not commercially viable. I made it look like I was preparing to poach key Aura employees and launch a startup. I then used a secure, encrypted email service to send a message to Aura's board of directors. I didn't accuse Alexander of anything. Instead, I wrote as a concerned senior stakeholder, hinting at internal creative dissonance and a potential conflict of interest regarding the CEO's personal commitments affecting his professional focus. I cited the postponed honeymoon as an example of shifting priorities. It was a seed of doubt, planted in the most fertile soil imaginable, the mind of a nervous investor. As I worked, another message from Alexander came through. This one was longer, more desperate. "Alara, please. This silence is killing me. I know you're angry and you have every right to be. But you have to understand this is a life or death situation. Lily has no one. If I left and something happened, I could never live with myself. You married a man who takes responsibility seriously. Please talk to me. Let me know you're all right. I love you." I read the message, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. You married a man who takes responsibility seriously. The words were a masterpiece of self-justification. He was responsible for everyone but me. His vow to me was the one responsibility he could postpone. I didn't reply. Instead, I booked a sea kayaking tour for the following morning. I would paddle into the caldera at sunrise, a solitary figure in a vast, ancient landscape. I was the ghost in his machine now. I was the line of code he never saw, the bug in his system, the silent, cascading failure that would bring his perfect world crashing down. And with every silent digital strike, I felt a piece of myself, the part that had loved him so completely, calcify and turn to armor. He was at her bedside, playing the hero. I was in paradise, learning to be the villain of my own story. And it was the most liberating feeling I had ever known. The sea kayak sliced through the water, A silent, steady motion that mirrored the rhythm of my new resolve. The Santorini caldera at sunrise was a spiritual experience. The water was a sheet of mercury reflecting the slow-burn fire of the dawn sky. The cliffs, massive and ancient, were painted in shades of ochre and rose. There was no sound but the dip of my paddle and the occasional cry of a distant gull. I was alone, profoundly, magnificently alone. In this immense solitude, there was no room for the echo of Alexander's voice, no space for Lily's perpetual need. There was only me, my own breath, and the strength in my arms as I propelled myself forward. This was my baptism. Not into a new marriage but into a new self. A self that was not an appendage, not a supporting character but the sole protagonist. When I returned to the villa, salt-crusted and invigorated, the digital storm I had set in motion was beginning to break. My phone was lit up with notifications. Missed calls from Alexander. From Hisio Mark. From 2 different members of the board. The scheduled blog post and Instagram photo had gone live. I poured a glass of orange juice and scrolled through the comments on the Instagram post. Who is the silent genius? Spill the tea, Alex. This is so sweet. Is this about your wife? She's an artist, right? Wait, I thought Aura was a one-man vision? This implies a co-creator. What's the story? The blog post had garnered even more attention. Tech journalists were picking it up, writing pieces with headlines like, Aura Tech CEO acknowledges unknown partner, and is there a secret weapon behind Aura's success? The seed of doubt was sprouting. I listened to the voicemails. Alexander's was first, confused and slightly irritated. Alara, did you see my post? I don't even remember writing that. The PR team is going wild, asking me who I'm talking about. It's causing a lot of confusion here. I've got enough on my plate with Lily. Call me please. Then Mark, the COO, his voice tight with professional concern. Alexander, we need to talk. The board is asking questions about this blog post. Also, we've hit a snag with the quarterly liquidity. The funds for the vendor payments are tied up in that bond portfolio. I thought you were against that move. We need your signature to reverse it, but the system says it was already approved under your credentials. Call me as a P. Finally, a voicemail from Sarah Jenkins, the most meticulous and paranoid member of the board. Alexander, it's Sarah. I received a very concerning anonymous email this morning. It hints at internal strife and a potential competing project. I need a full briefing before the quarterly call next week. This is not a trivial matter. A slow, cold smile touched my lips. It was working. The perfectly calibrated machine of his life was beginning to shudder. Gears were grinding. Warning lights were flashing. And he was stuck in a hospital room, too distracted to even properly diagnose the problem. I felt a flicker of something, not guilt but a sort of clinical pity. He was like a captain on the bridge of a ship, convinced he was steering it through a known storm, oblivious to the fact that I had quietly reprogrammed the navigational systems to steer him directly into an iceberg. It was time to make my physical presence known, but on my terms. I could no longer be the ghost. I needed to be the specter at the feast. I logged into my own long-dormant social media accounts. I posted a single photo I had taken that morning, a breathtaking shot from my kayak, the sun a perfect orange orb rising over the volcanic cliffs, the water impossibly still. No selfie, no caption. Just the location tag, OIA Santorini, Greece. The subtext was a sledgehammer. I was not weeping at my mother's house. I was in the place he had promised to take me. I was living the honeymoon he had postponed. The response was immediate. Comments flooded in from our mutual friends. Wait, aren't you supposed to be with Alex? Santorini. Well, who took the picture? Thinking of you, Alara. Hope you're okay. The gossip mill would now be churning at full speed. Did they break up? Why is she in Santorini alone? Where's Alexander? I knew it would only be a matter of minutes before someone screenshotted my post and sent it to him. I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang. It was him. This time I answered. Alara. His voice was a ragged mix of relief and confusion. Where are you? Your post, it says Santorini. Is that a joke? No joke, I said, my voice calm, neutral. The sound of the Aegean wind was a soft whisper in the background. What are you doing there? The confusion was rapidly being replaced by dawning horror. How did you get there? I used the ticket you bought me, Alexander. It seemed a shame to let it go to waste. There was a long silence. I could hear hospital noises in the background. A distant intercom, the squeak of a wheel. You're on our honeymoon? Alone. He said the word alone as if it were a synonym for contagious. It's very peaceful, I said. You should see the sunsets. They're even more beautiful when you're not being interrupted. The barb landed. I heard his sharp intake of breath. Alara, this isn't funny. I'm here in this horrible place dealing with a crisis and you're vacationing? How can you be so selfish? The word was a trigger, but it didn't provoke the reaction he expected. It solidified my resolve. Selfish. I repeated, my voice still quiet. I'm following the new rules of our marriage, Alexander. You prioritize what's most urgent. I'm simply doing the same. What is that supposed to mean? Lily was in a car accident. She could have died. And my marriage was in an accident the moment you walked away from me at that airport, I said, the first hint of steel entering my tone. It seems only one of those emergencies warranted your full attention. That's not fair. You're my wife. This is different. You're right, I said. It is different. A wife is supposed to be a partner, not a placeholder. You made your choice. Repeatedly. I'm just finally accepting it. So what are you saying? He demanded, his voice rising. You're just going to sit there in our honeymoon suite and sulk? I looked out at the pristine pool, the stunning view. I'm not sulking, Alexander. I'm planning. I let the word hang in the air, heavy with implication. You should get back to Lily. She needs you now. And before he could respond, I ended the call. I powered down my phone and tossed it onto the plush sofa. The calm was over. The storm was now on both fronts. He was finally aware that his placid, understanding wife was gone, replaced by a woman he did not know, in a place he was supposed to be, holding the keys to a kingdom he was on the verge of losing. The battle lines were drawn. And for the first time I felt like I was winning. The silence after I ended the call was more profound than any that had come before. It was a silence of my own making, a deliberate severing of the tether. I knew with a chilling certainty that the man on the other end of that line was no longer my husband in any way that mattered. He was my adversary. I gave myself 24 hours of peace. I turned my phone off completely. I spent the day exploring the island, not as a heartbroken woman, but as a conqueror surveying her new domain. I ate grilled octopus at a seaside taverna, the flavors explosive and real. I hiked the path from Fyra to Oahe, the caldera sprawling beside me, a testament to cataclysmic change that results in breathtaking beauty. I was my own cataclysm. I was my own breathtaking beauty. When I powered my phone back on, the digital fallout was spectacular. It was a symphony of chaos and I was the conductor. There were 37 missed calls from Alexander. Dozens of texts, their tone evolving from confused anger to outright panic. Call me right now. This isn't a game. The board is in an emergency meeting. What did you say to Sarah? Mark can't access the operating funds. What bond portfolio? Blair, what have you done? People are asking why you're in Santorini. They're saying we've split up. My investors are nervous. Where is the money? The final text was the most satisfying. I'm coming there. We need to talk face to face. Tell me where you're staying. He was unraveling. The pressure from the board, the financial strangulation, the public speculation about our marriage, and the gnawing mystery of my actions were pulling at the threads of his carefully constructed world. And Lily was still in the hospital, a drain on his emotional resources. He couldn't be in two places at once. The indispensable man was finding himself dispensable. I didn't reply to his texts. Instead, I booked a flight to Mykonos for the next day. Let him come to Santorini. Let him waste his time and energy searching for a ghost in a whitewashed maze. I would be long gone, leaving behind only a digital paper trail and the whispers of the staff at the villa who had seen the solitary, serene woman who never cried. But before I left, I had one more piece to play. The most personal one. I accessed the shared photo album we had used to plan our wedding. I created a new album, titled it Postponed, and began curating it. I added the most romantic, intimate photos from our wedding. The first kiss, our first dance, him feeding me cake, the look of adoration in his eyes as he'd slid the ring onto my finger. Then I added a single new photo, the one I'd taken from my kayak at sunrise, the epitome of solitary peace. I wrote a caption for the album: "Some journeys are meant to be taken alone. Thank you for setting me free." I set the album to public and shared the link to my social media. It was a nuclear option. It was no longer a hint. It was a declaration. The narrative was now firmly in my control. I was not the victim. I was the emancipated. As I packed my single suitcase, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. I was shedding not just the weight of a bad marriage, but the weight of an identity that had never truly fit. I was Alara the artist, Alara the strategist, Alara the survivor. My flight to Mykonos was short and smooth. I checked into a smaller, more vibrant hotel in the heart of Mykonos town, a place of blue shutters and winding bougainvillea-draped alleys. It was a world away from the isolated luxury of the Santorini villa. Here I could disappear into a crowd. That evening I sat at a bar in Little Venice, watching the waves crash against the foundations of the buildings. I ordered a cocktail and opened my laptop. I had one final decisive move to make. It was time to formalize my exit. I drafted an email to Alexander, carbon copying his lawyer and my own. The subject line was, "Separation Agreement." The body of the email was a masterpiece of cold, professional clarity. I outlined the terms of our separation. I stated that due to irreconcilable differences, namely his demonstrated pattern of prioritizing his relationship with Lily over his marital vows, the marriage was untenable. I listed my contributions to Aura Tech not as a wife, but as an uncredited creative director and strategist. I attached a portfolio of my work: the UI designs, the marketing plans, the notes from investor meetings. Then I presented my offer. I would not be seeking alimony in the traditional sense. Instead, I proposed a one-time lump sum settlement equivalent to the value of the crypto assets I had already transferred, plus an additional amount that reflected my sweat equity in the company. It was a staggering figure, but one I had calculated down to the last decimal, a fair price for my years of silence and support. In return, I would sign a comprehensive NDA, walk away quietly, and he would retain full public ownership of Aura Tech. His reputation, though tarnished, would be salvageable. It was a deal. A brutal, businesslike end to a relationship that had begun with poetry and promises. I ended the email with one final devastating line: "Consider this the formal notification that our honeymoon and our marriage is no longer postponed. It is terminated." I attached the document, took a deep breath, and hit send. The deed was done. I had taken everything I could digitally, financially, and emotionally. I had thrown his life into disarray and presented him with a path to save what was left of it, at a cost he could scarcely afford but would have to pay. I closed my laptop and sipped my cocktail. The sun was setting, painting the white walls of the buildings in a warm, golden light. I felt empty, but it was a clean, hollowed-out emptiness, ready to be filled with something new. My phone, which I had kept on, buzzed once. It was a new email notification. The sender was Alexander Blackwood. The subject line was, "Separation Agreement." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what it contained: the frantic, furious, desperate response of a man whose world was collapsing. He had collapsed. And I, for the first time since he had walked away from me at the airport, was finally, truly free. I didn't read Alexander's email. Not then. I let it sit in my inbox, a digital tombstone for our relationship. I knew its contents would be a messy amalgamation of fury, pleading, and legal threats, and I had no desire to let his chaos pollute the serene space I had carved for myself. The power had irrevocably shifted. He was now reacting to me. I spent the next 2 days in Mykonos embracing an anonymity I hadn't realized I craved. I danced in a crowd at a beach club, the thumping music a physical force that drove out all thought. I got a temporary tattoo of a phoenix on my shoulder blade. I flirted harmlessly with a Swedish sculptor who appreciated the line of my collarbone and asked to sketch me. I felt alive, present in my own skin in a way I hadn't for years. I was not Mrs. Blackwood. I was Alara, a woman with a past but more importantly a future. Curiosity, however, is a persistent creature. On the third morning, sitting at a cafe with a cappuccino, I finally opened Alexander's email. It was worse than I had imagined. The tone was unhinged, ricocheting between professions of love and vile accusations. "Alara, what the hell is this? Separation agreement? Are you insane? You've stolen from me. You've sabotaged my company. You've turned our private life into a public spectacle. I could have you arrested. I don't understand any of this. Because I stayed to help a friend who almost died. Is that the crime for which you're destroying me? I love you. I married you. Lily is just a friend who needed me in a crisis. How can you be so cold, so calculating? The board is threatening to vote me out. The vendor payments are late because of your little financial stunt, and our credit is taking a hit. That error folder? What is that? Are you planning to destroy me? Why? I'm leaving for Santorini tonight. We need to talk. Face to face. You will explain this. You will give me back what you've taken. You will call off the dogs. This isn't you, Alara. This is some monster I don't recognize. The woman I love would never do this. Tell me where you are. Please. Alexander. P.S. Lily was discharged. She's staying with her mother. So you see, your little tantrum was for nothing. I could have been with you all along if you hadn't chosen to be so vindictive. The P.S. was the masterstroke, a final, desperate attempt to reframe the narrative and make me feel foolish. It failed. All it did was confirm that Lily was fine and his crisis was over, yet he was still blaming me for the consequences of his own choices. I felt nothing for him. No pity, no anger, not even contempt. He was simply a problem I had already solved. I drafted a one-line reply. I am no longer in Santorini. All communication can go through my lawyer. I then forwarded his entire email to my lawyer with a note. As you can see, he's unstable. I expect any further communication to be hostile. Please proceed accordingly. I blocked Alexander's number and his email address. The cord was not just cut, it was incinerated. I decided to extend my trip. Greece was vast and I was just getting started. I booked a ferry to Crete, a larger, wilder island with ancient ruins and rugged mountains. It felt like a fitting next stage, a place of myth and endurance. The day before I was due to leave Mykonos, I was browsing in a little art gallery tucked away in a back alley. I was drawn to a series of paintings depicting the Minotaur's labyrinth, not as a place of terror, but as a complex, beautiful puzzle. The artist was a local man named Nikos who was sitting in the corner, sketching. He looked up as I examined his work. His eyes were the color of the Aegean Sea, deep and knowing. You see it, he said, his English accented but fluent. It wasn't a question. See what? I asked. That the labyrinth is not the monster's prison, he said, standing and walking over to me. He was probably in his late 40s with a kind, weathered face and strong, paint-stained hands. It is the monster's sanctuary, and also its challenge. To find the center of yourself, you must first navigate the maze you have built. His words struck a chord so deep it vibrated in my bones. I had been navigating the maze of my marriage for years, and now I was in the center. I had faced the monster, the part of me that had accepted less than I deserved, and I had slain it. It's beautiful, I said, gesturing to the painting. So is the woman who understands it, he replied with a gentle smile. You have the eyes of someone who has been lost and is finally finding her way. We talked for an hour. About art, about Crete, about the concept of home. It was the first real, unguarded conversation I'd had in what felt like a lifetime. There was no agenda, no hidden need, just a meeting of minds. He didn't ask about my past or my ringless finger. He simply saw me. I bought the painting, a small, powerful piece that depicted a single bright thread leading through the dark complexity of the labyrinth. Ariadne's thread, the symbol of the way out. As I left the gallery, Nikos said, if you go to Crete, visit the ruins of Knossos. But go early before the crowds. Listen to the stones. They have stories of powerful women. I carried the painting back to my hotel, a strange, hopeful warmth in my chest. It wasn't about Nikos, not romantically. It was about the connection. It was proof that there was a world beyond Alexander, a world of art and philosophy and quiet, meaningful encounters. A world where I was seen for who I was, not for who I was in relation to someone else. On the ferry to Crete the next day, standing on the deck as the wind whipped my hair, I thought about Alexander. He would be in Santorini now, frantic, searching for me. He would be confronting the silence I had left behind, the closed door. He would be facing the total collapse of the life he knew. He had collapsed because his foundation was weak. It was built on the assumption that I would always be there, steady and forgiving, to absorb the shocks of his other commitments. But I was no longer his foundation. I was the earthquake. And as the rugged coast of Crete emerged from the haze on the horizon, I knew I was sailing toward my own new beginning, built on the unshakable ground of my own worth. Crete was a revelation. It was not the pristine picture postcard beauty of Santorini, nor the frantic party-ready energy of Mykonos. It was raw, ancient, and powerfully grounded. The mountains were bone-dry and stoic, the people had a quiet pride in their eyes, and the air smelled of wild herbs and centuries of myth. I took Nikos's advice. On my first morning I went to the palace of Knossos as the gates opened. I wandered through the sprawling, complex ruins alone, the rising sun casting long, dramatic shadows. I ran my hand over the warm, weathered stone, tracing the faint outlines of frescoes depicting bull leapers and serpent goddesses. This was the heart of the labyrinth, the home of Ariadne, the princess who gave Theseus the thread to navigate the maze and then was abandoned by him on another island. The parallel was not lost on me. I had been Alexander's Ariadne, providing the intellectual and emotional thread that guided him to his success. And he had abandoned me not on an island, but at the threshold of our new life. But the myth, I realized, had always been told from the hero's perspective. Standing there in the silent, female-powered heart of the ancient world, I saw a different story. Ariadne wasn't a victim. She was an architect of her own escape. She used the hero to get herself out of an oppressive situation. When Theseus left, she didn't wither away. In some versions of the myth, she was found by Dionysus, the god of ecstasy and transformation, and made immortal. I wasn't waiting for a god to save me. My transformation was my own doing. I found a quiet corner overlooking the throne room and opened my laptop. The Wi-Fi was patchy, but it was enough. There was an email from my lawyer. The subject line was, "Settlement offer." I opened it, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. Alexander, through his lawyer, had responded. He was rejecting my initial proposal. He was countering with a paltry sum, a fraction of what I'd asked for, and was threatening to press criminal charges for the theft of the crypto assets and corporate espionage if I didn't accept immediately and sign a draconian NDA. It was a bluff. A pathetic, flailing attempt to regain control. He knew as well as I did that pursuing criminal charges would drag Oratech through the mud, expose his own financial carelessness, and reveal the full extent of my behind-the-scenes role. The board would never allow it. My lawyer's note was succinct. He's posturing. He's under immense pressure from the board. I recommend we hold firm. His position is weaker than he thinks. I typed a quick reply. I agree. No further communication from us. Let him sweat. The power was not just in making moves, but in the patience to watch them play out. I had thrown the dice. Now I would let them land. I spent the next week exploring Crete. I hiked the Samaria Gorge, my muscles burning with a healthy physical pain that cleansed the psyche. I swam in the Libyan Sea, its water a clear, shocking blue. I ate simple, glorious food, Daco's fresh grilled fish, creamy yogurt with thyme honey. I started sketching again, filling a notebook with images of the landscape, the people, the light. The creative well that had been stagnant for years was beginning to flow. One evening in the coastal town of Chania, I was sitting at a taverna in the old Venetian harbor, sketching the iconic lighthouse. An older couple at the next table struck up a conversation. They were Canadian retired teachers on a 3-month tour of Europe. "You're traveling alone?" the woman Maureen asked, her tone not prying but impressed. "Yes," I said. "It's been educational." "The best kind of travel," her husband Frank boomed. "Forces you to meet yourself." They invited me to join them for dinner. We talked for hours about history, art, their grandchildren, my sketches. It was easy, uncomplicated. As we said goodnight, Maureen squeezed my hand. "You have a strong spirit, my dear. I can see it. Don't ever let anyone dim it." Tears pricked my eyes, unexpected and warm. It was the kindness of strangers, the validation from the universe that I was on the right path. Back in my rented room, I checked my email. There was another message from my lawyer. The subject was, "Urgent. New offer." Alexander had folded. Faced with a mutinous board, a liquidity crisis, and the utter silence from my camp, he had capitulated. His new offer met 90% of my original demand. It was more money than I could spend in a lifetime. The terms were clean. A full release of all claims, a strict NDA that bound us both, and a swift, quiet dissolution of our marriage. My lawyer's note was triumphant. He caved. The board forced his hand. They want this scandal to go away before the next funding round. I advise you to accept. It's a phenomenal deal. I read the attached agreement. It was all there. My freedom, bought and paid for with the currency of my own silenced contributions. I felt no joy, only a deep, profound sense of closure. This was the center of the labyrinth. This was the end of the thread. I had navigated the maze of betrayal, anger, and revenge, and I had emerged not with the monster's head, but with my own sovereignty. I typed a single word in reply to my lawyer: accept. I signed the digital documents, my signature a swift, final slash on the screen. It was over. I walked out onto my small balcony, overlooking the dark, shimmering sea. The stars were impossibly bright, undimmed by city lights. I thought of Alexander, alone in his empty apartment, his company wounded, his reputation in tatters, his marriage a smoking ruin. He had indeed collapsed. Not dramatically but systematically, under the weight of his own choices and the quiet, relentless pressure of the woman he had underestimated. I had taken everything from him: his money, his peace of mind, his control over the narrative, and his wife. And I had given myself the one thing he never could: my complete and utter self-possession. The honeymoon was over. My life was just beginning. The money hit my account 5 days later. The number was so large it felt abstract, a string of digits that held no emotional weight beyond its symbolism: freedom. With it came the final, stamped divorce decree, delivered via encrypted email. I was officially, legally Alara Vance once more. I rented a small, sun-drenched apartment in the old town of Chania, with a terrace overlooking a quiet courtyard filled with lemon trees. It was a far cry from the sterile, modern luxury Alexander favored. This place had soul. It had history. It had cracks in the plaster and the scent of jasmine on the evening breeze. It was a home, not a showpiece. I didn't tell anyone where I was. My mother knew I was safe and that the divorce was final. I'd sent her a brief, reassuring email. The rest of the world could wonder. The postponed album was still up on my social media, a permanent, poetic epitaph. I had no desire to explain myself or engage with the fallout. My revenge was complete, and the best form of continued revenge was a life lived joyfully and well. I enrolled in a pottery class. My hands, so adept at navigating keyboards and touchscreens, struggled with the primal centering act of wedging clay and coaxing form from a spinning wheel. It was humbling and exhilarating. I made lopsided bowls and wobbly vases, and I loved every imperfect one of them. They were mine. I also started painting again. Large, bold canvases filled with the colors of Greece: the stark white and blue, the ochre of the earth, the deep magenta of the bougainvillea. But they weren't peaceful landscapes. They were abstract explosions of feeling. One I titled The Collapse. Another, Ariadne's Thread. My art was no longer a hobby. It was an exorcism. Weeks turned into a month. One afternoon I was in a bookstore looking for collections of Greek poetry, when a familiar voice behind me said, "Alara." I turned. It was Nikos, the artist from Mykonos. He looked the same, a worn leather satchel slung over his shoulder, his eyes crinkling in a smile. "Nikos," I said, genuinely surprised and pleased. "What are you doing in Chania?" "I have a show at a small gallery here," he said. "I came to set it up." "And you? You found Crete, I see." "I did. I'm living here for now." We went for coffee. It was easy as it had been before. He told me about his show, the themes of identity and home he was exploring. I found myself telling him a little more of my story, not the sordid details of revenge but the essence of it. I spoke of a marriage where I had become a secondary character, and of the journey to reclaim my voice. "A woman who buys a painting of a labyrinth is a woman on a quest," he said, stirring his coffee. "And you? Have you found what you were looking for?" I looked out at the people walking past, at the vibrant life of the street. "I found myself," I said simply. "That was the quest." He nodded as if I'd confirmed something he already knew. "And now?" "Now," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, "I get to decide what to do with her." We saw each other several times over the next week. He took me to hidden beaches only locals knew. I showed him my paintings and he critiqued them not with flattery but with a keen, constructive eye. There was a quiet, growing understanding between us, A connection built on mutual respect for art and a shared understanding of starting over. It was tender and slow. It held no urgency, no desperate need. It was the beginning of a second love, not as a frantic escape from loneliness, but as a gentle addition to a life that was already full. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the Venetian harbor, he said, "You know, in the myth after Theseus, Ariadne's story doesn't end. He finds a new life. A better one." "I know," I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. It felt natural. It felt right. I thought of Alexander then for what I knew would be one of the last times. I didn't wonder if he was okay. I didn't care. The news feeds I occasionally skimmed showed that Oratech had survived, but it was wounded. Its valuation had dropped. Alexander was no longer the golden boy. He was a cautionary tale about focus and personal conduct. He had his company, the hollowed-out shell of his dream. And he had Lily, the friend whose need had been the catalyst for it all. I hoped for his sake that she was worth the price he had paid. He had collapsed under the weight of the world he built, a world that could not stand without my silent support. I had not collapsed. I had ascended. I had risen from the ashes of a love that had asked for everything and given little in return. I had my money, my freedom, my art, and the quiet, steady promise of a new connection. As Nikos took my hand, his grip warm and sure, I looked out at the horizon where the sea met the sky. There were no more postponed dreams. There was only the vast, beautiful, and utterly open future. I was no longer the woman who had nodded calmly and let him go. I was the woman who had calmly taken everything and in doing so had found everything she truly needed. The honeymoon was over. My life at long last was mine. The end.